So this is a topic that is near and dear to my heart, and I know affects a lot of you. It affected me, especially way back in the day, and that is troubleshooting a snare or a drum that just it doesn't sound good. Something is wrong. I remember specifically in college, I went like 2 or 3 days without eating because my snare was just absolutely, it sounded horrible, and I was getting ready for my senior recital, and I'd worked for all semester for this, and it was, like this, and it was, my snare didn't sound good. And it was just wrecking my whole world. And turns out it was a warped head, but because I was so caught up into this issue, I couldn't even see straight to troubleshoot it. So this video is going to have a lot of talking. It's not going to have playing. It's simply going to be talking you through how to logically assess what's going on with your snare drum, okay? And to kind of keep that emotional part out of it and just logically troubleshoot this thing, because it took me a long time to learn how to do that. One key thing that I had to learn very quickly was you do not need to tune in your practice time. So if you are going into practice, do not make that your drum tuning time, because what's going to happen is you're going to start getting frustrated that you are wasting your practice time trying to get the drum to sound good. Allot time outside of practice time to come in with a cup of coffee or your favorite brew or whatever it may be, and sit down and spend some time with the drums trying to troubleshoot them and make them sound better. Make them two separate events, okay? First of all, whenever we're troubleshooting the snare, we have to figure out exactly what is the issue. So sit there and look at it and say, all right, what's the issue? It doesn't sound good, but that can mean a lot of things. So, is there too much overtone? Is there too much ring? Do the snares vibrate whenever you hit a tom? Does it sound too dead? Are there weird overtones? Is there not enough snare sound? Like, what specifically is the issue with the snare that you're not happy with? Because a lot of times we're just like, oh, it just doesn't sound good. It's big emotional. And I'm there too. Like, I'm there with you. But why? What is the specific thing that doesn't sound good? And if there's a few things like, well, there's not enough snare and it's a little too low and there's this weird overtone. Okay, let's deal with one at a time, segmenting them as different problems. The thing I always like to start with is a couple of, and there's going to be 10 tips here. They're going to be the physical aspects of the actual drum. So is there structurally anything wrong with the drum? And the first thing I'm going to start looking at is the snare wires, the snare bed, that type of a thing. So I'm gonna first assess, okay, are the snares I have on there too big or too small for that drum? Different rims are cut different ways. Different snare beds are cut different ways. For instance, I do not like the way a really wide snare sounds on this snare drum. I had it on there and it just, I fought with it and fought with it and fought with it and could not get it to sound how I wanted it to sound. And so I went back to just a regular, the smaller snare drum instead of that double strand. So first thing I'm going to be looking at is the snare too wide. Are the snares too wide or too small for the particular drum that I'm working on? The next thing I'm going to look at, especially if the snares are the issue, is did I mount them correctly? Sometimes when we mount them, we either mount them too tightly so that whenever we go to throw this back on, we only have we only have a very small amount that we can adjust it. Sometimes we do it too loosely where we literally have to screw both sides forever, and then finally you have like one twist and it sounds perfect, but beyond that you can't adjust it, right? So if you tighten them too much when you're actually putting the snares on, or if you tighten them too loosely when you're putting the snares on, that's going to be an issue. So that would be two physical things with the actual snares and the snare wires that I would look at. Not to mention, are the snare wires, like, are they jacked up? Like, do they look horrible? One of my kids got a hold of one of my snares and he didn't mean to, but he played this side of the drum and so the snares just were demolished, He bashed on it. And so that's just two things that you can sit there and look at. The first one is the size of the snare versus the bed, how it's cut for that snare drum. Is it a good fit? The next one is when you mounted the actual wires, did you mount them too tightly or too loosely so that you don't have enough room to adjust them? The next physical thing I'm going to look at with the drum is I'm going to look at the lugs. Do I have any lugs that are stripped out? So in other words, whenever I'm hitting the drum, they're coming undone, they're coming unscrewed. Do I have any that are bottomed down? In other words, I've tightened them as much as I can, and maybe I need to go get a lug that's a little bit longer so I have a little bit more room to play with that. Are there any missing lugs? And you might be like, Steven, come on, you would know that. I had a tom that I was having trouble with on gigs, and I never thought to look under the drum. I was just dealing with the top of the drum. I never thought to look under the drum. At some gig, I had dropped a lug. It was missing one of the lugs there, and it was giving me really strange overtones. And it was impossible to tune. Place the lug, problem was solved. So always start with the most obvious. Are the lugs giving you issues? Again, these are just troubleshoot. It's just like checked it off, checked it off, checked it off. It's basic troubleshooting. So that's going to be the third tip, is check those lugs. The fourth one that I mentioned earlier that like made me not eat for like 3 days. It was horrible. I was just completely stressed out about this. It was all, I had drummers coming in, I had grad students, I had professors. I'm like, what's the matter with this snare? I just bought a new snare head, so I was like, it couldn't be the head, could it? It was the head. The head was warped, and it was the last thing I troubleshot. I could have saved myself weeks of anguish if I would have taken the head off and simply rolled it across the ground or set it on a table and looked at it. It was very obvious it was warped. I took it back to the store and was like, hey guys, I just put this on there. They knew me well. I said, it's warped, obviously. And so I got a new one. But that, I mean, and that was back whenever I was like, that was my poor days. Like a drum head cost a lot for me. That was a big deal for me to get a new drum head. So the fact that the drum was sounding worse when I put a new head on it was not encouraging. So you want to make sure that the head is not damaged. In other words, punctured. Sometimes the bottom heads will become punctured. It is not warped. It's not cracked. It's not any of those things. All of that will affect the sound. So that's the next thing I'm going to look at is how's the condition of the head? Is it in round? Is it warped? All that. Then again, it's sidelined. All of these things are things that have sidelined me before. So the next obvious thing is that head. The fifth one that's not as likely, but can be the case. It was the case. I got together with a bunch of drummers last week, and actually in transport, one of the drums had gotten a nick on the rim, and it did affect the tone. And so you want to physically look at the actual drum and see if there's damage to specifically the rim. You want to look at the rim, see if there's damage, if the shell has become cracked. All of those things can affect how that sounds. Now, typically drums are not going to crack, but especially if you're on the road, you're taking them in and out of clubs, things will get set on top of them. People will not pay attention. Things will drop, and they can drop and hit the edge of that drum and really mess it up. Like I said, my buddy, he took his drum out and he had a clear head on the top, and we were all really bummed out because it had a really significant ding there in the top, and that will affect the tone of the drum. So look at the physical drum. Is it cracked? Are the heads the actual hoops damaged where the head will be laying against the drum? All right, so now that we've got the physical things, the sixth thing is going to be, we're going to address the head. Is the head in tune with itself? A lot of times if we're getting weird overtones, we can't understand where they're coming from. I always like to start from a base level. Like, let's start from ground zero and build up from there. The easiest way to start from ground zero is to make sure that each lug is in tune with itself. All that means the head will be in tune with itself. All that means is that this lug sounds like this lug, sounds like this lug. See, this one's a little bit higher. So I would take that and I would crank it down until it sounded in tune with itself. I would do the same thing with the bottom head. Once you get to that point, then you can say, okay, I'm going to raise it, I'm going to lower it, and then sometimes you can troubleshoot by only detuning or tuning up by half a turn, a full turn, one or the other of the lug. So it's not a hard, tried and fast rule that it has to always stay the same. Every lug has to stay the same pitch, but it's a great place to start when we're troubleshooting the actual snare, making sure that it sounds good. So again, that's going to affect those overtones big time. The next thing that I talk about a lot, especially with beginner drummers, is the quality and the condition of the head. So obviously if there's a hole in it, we need to replace that head, right? Even if it's a reso head on the bottom. But factory heads suck. Period. They are not made to be played for a long time. They are made to be the cheapest option to put on the drum to get it out of the factory. So when you buy a new drum set, just because you bought a new drum set does not mean you bought new good heads. It means you bought factory heads. You're going to probably need to replace those. Some drum companies have started making better heads for their factory kits, but a lot of them have not. So when you buy a new kit or a used kit, you want to look at the condition of the actual head itself. So if it's a factory head that came with the kit new, or you bought a kit used and it still has the factory heads, those gotta go. You're not gonna get a good tone out of it. It's gonna be horrible. It's gonna be a horrible experience. Just take it from me. Replace the head with something quality. Now, beyond that, is the head dead? In other words, it just doesn't have life to it. I just changed this snare head, not because the drum was sounding awful, it just didn't, like, it lacked life. Okay, it lacked color, it lacked vibrance. So if you see that the head's been on there for a long time, if you see that it's starting to lose its vibrance, then you want to replace the actual head. It's just become an old dead head. Now, something that that I will actually do sometimes is on the rim in very small markings, I'll just put the date that I replaced the head, so then I can be like, well, when did I replace it? And a lot of times, or underneath the head, I'll write it if you want to see it, because a lot of times the bottom head is clear. I'll write underneath the snare head when I replaced it, and then I can know, oh yeah, it's time to replace it, time for a new head. But if it's got factory heads, or if it's a really old beat up head, has a bunch of dents in it, get rid of that sucker. All right, number 8 is, are you tuning within the range of the drum? Every drum does not sound good detuned. Every drum does not sound great cranked up way high, okay? You need to understand, where does this drum sound good? Where does it sound best? The only way to do that is spend time with the drum, okay? If you're cranking this big deep snare way up and thinking, boy, it sounds horrible cranked up, you're out of the tuning range of that drum. If we're way down and you're getting all these weird overtones of warbly notes, you're out of the range of that drum. In other words, it's good sounding range. A lot of times they have a very wide sounding good range. Some drums that I have a much narrower sounding range where they sound good. So you want to make sure you're tuning within the good range, acceptable range of that drum. And that varies from drum to drum. Good, obviously, in sound is a quality type thing, and that has to do with each person individually. So take some time, figure out where the sweet spot on the drum is, and that way when you're tuning, you can go, oh yeah, this drum, if I detune it past this point, it sounds horrible. So you'll know that for future reference. The 9th one is one that constantly comes up. Matter of fact, just this morning, the snare, I sat down to play and I'm like, this doesn't sound right. And I began troubleshooting it, and sure enough, is your bottom head tuned up high enough, specifically for snares? The snares, on a snare drum, you have this extra added element of the snares going across there. The thing that affects how quickly those snares react is the tension of this head. So typically, the tighter this head is cranked up, you're gonna get a quicker, snappier response from those snares. So if you're not getting enough snare in there, if it's not reacting enough, even though you've adjusted everything else, chances are this bottom head is not cranked up tight enough. I like to crank my bottom head way up, and I know I don't have this mic'd, but compared to that top head, it's much higher, okay? And I'm not even satisfied that it's high enough. I may want to go a little bit higher with it, but especially with students that come in here that are having snares they're having problems with, crank that bottom head up. Very rarely do we need to come, matter of fact, I can't ever remember a time whenever we came down with the bottom head. And whenever I was in New Orleans, I used to crank it up so high that the bottom head would split before the top head would, just from the tension, because I like the snappiness and response from that. So if you're not getting enough snare response, if you're having weird overtones, if you just can't get that top head to tune it right, just try it. Crank the bottom head way up evenly all across the lugs and see what happens. Again, just explore with the drum. So that's the 9th thing. And the 10th thing is, and I'm gonna have another video on this channel, and I'm not sure if it'll post before this one or after this one, but it's going to be about muffling the snare drum. And the last thing is, once I've got it to a good tune, and I think, okay, it sounds good, do you need to muffle it so you're just getting a weird overtone, something? There's no shame in that game. Muffle the thing. If it is not giving you the tones that you want, don't be afraid to say, you know what, I'm just going to throw a drum dot on it. I'm going to throw some gaff tape. I'm going to throw, heck, in the studio, we're throwing towels over them. I'm going to tape some paper towel on there. I'm going to put my wallet on it. A lot of old jazzers would do that. That's a quick fix for a treble snare. Drum tacks, drum rings, big fat snare drum. There's all kinds of, a moon gel. All of those work. And then you don't have to use the full one. If that's too much, you can either put it on the edge like this, where half of it's on the drum, half of it's on the edge, or you can actually cut it in half and just use half of it. A lot of these gel dampeners, they'll say they're way different. They're a lot the same. So don't be scared that if you buy a moon gel versus a drum dot versus a drum, like they're gonna muffle it just fine. And so that would be the last thing I'd look at is, do I need to add some muffling? Do I need to reduce that ring? Don't be so cocky that you have to tune your drums without any type of external muffling, because no drummer I know does that. Whenever I'm playing jazz, I like a lot more ring to the drum than whenever I'm playing pop. And when I'm playing a pop type or a country type of a session, rock session, I deaden that thing up a lot, because that's kind of the sound that they're going for, and it's the sound that the engineers want. So it all has to do with the situation. But that's going to be 10 tips for you to basically just logically go through and troubleshoot. Once you get to the end of those 10, if you still have problems, then dive deeper. But that's going to get you way past many of the problems and will help you fix those. Don't ever just get emotionally tied up to it. Don't ever try to tune in your practice time. Tune outside of your practice time, make it an event in and of itself. Sit down, enjoy the thing, get to know the drum, experiment with it, and just use logic. Logically troubleshoot. It is a machined thing. This is a made thing. It's moving. It's wood. It expands. It contracts. The head expands. It contracts. It just put this one on there. I'm gonna have to tighten it tomorrow. Like, it moves. It's a breathing type of a thing. You have to look at it and just logically troubleshoot the thing. So hopefully this has helped you. Put your favorite tip down in the comment section. I always love hearing from you as well. Subscribe to the channel if you like this. New videos coming out all the time. If you are subscribing and you haven't yet, hit that notifications bell. That's going to let you know when new videos are being posted, and I'm posting a ton of them with tons of useful stuff like this that I've just learned from years of sloughing it in and out of clubs and on the road, that type of stuff. Hit that thumbs up button if it's helped you. Share it with somebody that you think it may help as well. Jump over to the website. The Drum Better Daily program's there, whether you're a beginner, just needing to know where to start, or you're an advanced player. There's tons of stuff there for you. That link's below. But whatever you do, I'll see you here in the next video.